Welcome to the January meeting of AHSA Queensland for 2023. I'm Warwick Henry, the President. I'm usually there in person at Archerfield, but I'm doing a compulsory week at Makowski at the moment with the family. And so I'm coming by my iPad from Makowski. And Peter Dunn, our secretary, is as usual running the cameras and mics, etc., and the Zoom session. Welcome to our local members here in Archerfield and the departure lounge of Archerfield Airport, plus country members of AHSA Queensland and members of interstate AHSA branches joining us tonight. In March, our member Ian McDonald will be presenting accident record analysis, Piper Cherokee 6 series from 1960s to the present. And in April, John Minns will have a subject, a short history of air navigation. Now, our guest speaker tonight, long-term Melbourne AHSA member Dion Makowski, has a tale to tell on Tasmanian tigers. Dion, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll just start by getting the presentation up and running. So, Brenda Hean and the campaign to save Lake Pedder, an air adventure. This is the cover photo. It's a beautiful photo of Tiger Moth taken at Cambridge Aerodrome in 1972. Cambridge is at Hobart, the small aerodrome serving Hobart. But I'll now that you've seen that, I will talk to the actual talk. Lake Pedder in Tasmania was flooded in 1972 to extend the catchment for the Gordon River hydroelectric power scheme. The unique ecosystem in the heart of Tasmania's World Heritage Southwest Wilderness was accessible only by bushwalkers or by landing in light planes on its pristine white quartzite beach. It remains intact under 30 feet of water, the beach, where divers last year discovered tide tracks from the last planes to visit. On 8th of September 1972, Hobart pilot Max Price and Society Identity and committed environmentalist Brenda Hean flew from Cambridge Aerodrome in a World War II vintage two-seat civilianised D.H.82 Tiger Moth biplane. Brenda intended to influence federal parliament to intervene to save the national treasure and, using Max's skill, skywrite save Lake Pedder over Parliament House. Their aircraft never arrived at Flinders Island, Bass Strait. They and the plane disappeared, never to be seen again. VHAQL photographed on the famous quartzite beach at Lake Pedder. To commemorate the 50th anniversary of the lost flight and the bravery of Brenda Hean and Max Price, a plan was developed by Restore Lake Pedder, an organisation dedicated to reinstating what they regard as the jewel in the crown of Tasmania's wilderness. They plan to complete the journey as far as possible to the known original flight plan in a vintage DH-82 Tiger Moth, thus commencing the commemorative flight on the 50th anniversary date of the original flight, Thursday the 8th of September. According to organiser Dick Friend, we aim to retrace the original route and complete the original task that was embarked upon 50 years ago. The search began for a suitable plane. The first flight DH Tiger Moth was VHAQL on the left. British built at Hatfield in the UK. This is for the historical nerds out there. Constructors number 83126. This DH-82 became Royal Air Force T-5361, then diverted to Royal Australian Air Force. Offered for disposal by the Commonwealth Disposals Commission at Western Junction in Tasmania, T-5361 was sold on the 18th of February 1946 to the Tasmanian Aero Club for £452, which sounds to me a lot for a Tiger Moth in 1946, but anyway. Registered VHAQL in April 46 to the Tasmanian Aero Club, Western Junction Aerodrome and at Launceston, and later on in April 48 to the Aero Club of Southern Tasmania at Cambridge Aerodrome, Hobart, where you can see the aircraft taxiing there. Other key dates followed. 1957 changed owners to KF Jaeger of Smithton, Tasmania. I say these names because they may mean something to some of the people listening. May 1960, it crashed at Smithton, overturning during takeoff from a soft surface. And it was cancelled from the register, the Civil Aircraft Register, December 1960. The wreck was acquired by Max Price, licensed aircraft maintenance engineer at Hobart, who rebuilt it at Cambridge Aerodrome. VHAQL was eventually modified to include a coupe canopy a radio, modified fuel system including an auxiliary fuel tank, and with approval to install a smoke generating system for use in skywriting operations. The aircraft was to be flown from the front cockpit, and that's unusual. Tiger Moth's generally flown from the rear cockpit, but of course you in training you can change pilot. In November, 10th of November 66, it was again registered AQL, restored to the register to Maxwell H. Price of Hobart. The commemorative flight Tiger Moth, Millie the Moth, VHCXV, seen on the right here, also at Cambridge Aerodrome. Also built at Hatfield, constructors number 83250, went to RAF T5531, then diverted to the RAAF, the Royal Australian Air Force, as T5531. Disposal by the Commonwealth Disposals Commission at Western Junction and sold in May 46 to an F. Redden for £180, but we don't know what the condition was. It was obviously cheaper than the other one. Registered ATD, VH-ATD, June 46 to F. Redden at Camden, New South Wales. From 49 to 61, it was registered ATD, re-registered RNL, and finally CXV at the Newcastle, later Royal Aero Club, Broadmeadow Aerodrome, Newcastle, New South Wales. Between October 61 to 2005, it was located at Moree with various private owners, NF Norgard, WN Duff. And in 2005, it was with CR McPhee at Brisbane. Some of you may know CR McPhee, may even have some further information on that. And in November 07, Jack Curtis Aviation, Camden, New South Wales, was the registered owner. And in April 21, changed to Pearl Am Aviation Proprietary Limited, Cressy Aerodrome, Victoria. Somewhat prophetically, the two Tiger Moths of this story, T5361 and T5531, were part of a batch of 34 T-serial airframes taken on charge by the Royal Australian Air Force pre-Pacific War between July and September 1940. They were British-built aircraft and were shipped to Australia. The Havilland constructors' numbers were only 124 airframes apart, and they carried Royal Air Force serials, which they retained throughout their RAF service, as we've noted earlier. Additionally, both aircraft were offered for disposal in 1946 at Western Junction, Tasmania. Clearly, Millie was meant to be involved in this project. Paul Lamont and Siobhan Pereira Lamont now own pristine Tiger Moth Millie, providing joy flights in her from Cressy Aerodrome, Victoria, across the Western Plains of Victoria. With other vintage planes, the site is now being developed as a regional centre for historic aviation, where the wartime RAF base, which hosted the Central Gunnery School for the Royal Australian Air Force, was established. And I might just mention that the interest in these photographs from Jeffrey Goodall, thank you very much, Jeff. They're actually delivering aircraft here, Tiger Moth with a navigational Anson in support, delivering them from Victoria to Tasmania across Bass Strait, and T5361 is in that flight. On the right-hand side, T5531 apparently being serviced or rebuilt, possibly following an accident that occurred at Western Junction Aerodrome. The photograph is taken at Essendon Aerodrome during the war. It's a very, I think, interesting and probably fairly rare aircraft photograph. And the aircraft behind the silver one, I think UVH, was in fact a Porterfield, and it was owned by Reg Anzett himself. So that's a rather nice photograph. And Jeff Goodall does have the goods. He really does. He's got some amazing stuff. So we originally credited the Tasmanian Aviation Historical Society Incorporated for the following carefully chosen extracts, the source for which has not been credited nor information confirmed. However, it does appear that the sources are reasonably accurate. Some determinations were made based on this information, which I haven't included because they were, I guess, speculation at that point. But we will all speculate on what happened. So the pilot, Maxwell Price, seen on the left here in his front cockpit of his plane, held a valid commercial license, was endorsed on the aircraft, and had some 1,968 hours of flying experience, of which 962 hours were on this aircraft type, the D.H.82 Tiger Moth. The only passenger on board was Brenda Hean, who occupied the rear cockpit. The pilot submitted a flight plan to Hobart Flight Service Unit for a departure at 10:30 hours from Cambridge to Yarram, Victoria, with an intermediate stop at Flinders Island. The flight plan indicated the flight would be made in accordance with VFR flight rules at altitudes below 5,000 feet, with an estimated time interval of 160 minutes and an endurance of 250 minutes. The flight plan indicated carriage of life jackets, first aid equipment, and a VHF survival beacon. Whilst the pilot advised he did not intend to report his progress by radio en route, he did indicate that he would report to Flinders Island Flight Service Unit before 1400 hours Eastern Standard Time. Although the pilot did not obtain a Met forecast, there was nothing to suggest that the weather would have any bearing on the flight. The aircraft departed Cambridge at 10:16 hours, and 1 minute later, the pilot made an on-course radio report to Hobart Control Tower. No further transmissions were heard from the aircraft. The last reported sighting of the plane was at or near Eddystone Point, when a witness indicated the aircraft was flying at an altitude of about 2,000 feet and appeared to be operating normally. At 1400 hours, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when the pilot had not reported his arrival at Flinders Island, an intense air, sea and land search was commenced. No trace of the pilot, aircraft or passenger was ever found. In Tasmania, following the aircraft's disappearance, theories grew wild. Reports indicate that Price suspected an attempt was made on his life the week before the fatal flight, when the Tiger Moth suffered an engine failure en route to Maria Island, due, in his belief, that water had been put in the aircraft's engine oil. At the time, Price was alleged to be in conflict with an unnamed business partner, and allegations of embezzlement were brewing. The plane's emergency beacon was later found hidden behind some fuel drums. Despite some evidence pointing to potential sabotage of the aircraft, a police investigation went nowhere and authorities rejected calls for a public inquiry. In the 50 years since the disappearance of the aircraft, conspiracy theories continue to surround this intriguing story. But with no bodies or wreckage found, no coronial inquest was ever held, although the police have never declared the case closed. And in an era when the new Boeing 747 jumbo jets were changing travel forever, for example, transporting the author's family to visit relatives in the USA and UK, many found it hard to believe an aircraft could still disappear, even over Bass Strait, even in 1972. More on this later. Here on the left, we see Brenda and Max immediately prior to departure. Millie's regular pilot, Jason Cheney, accepted the challenges of flying an 80-plus-year-old open cockpit Tiger Moth over large distances, covering 3 states and a territory, Victoria, Tasmania, New South Wales and ACT. Co-pilot was to be Aviation Report Down Under's Dion Makowski, supporting Jason through the most difficult of the planned 12 legs, such as crossing Bass Strait, which separates Victoria and Tasmania. Dion was also to provide an eyewitness account of the commemoration, as well as services as team photojournalist. Organisers were delighted when Charlotte Ditcham, Brenda Hean's great-great-niece, offered to fill the seat occupied by her great-great-aunt 50 years earlier, on key legs such as the Hobart departure and East Coast leg. The Tassie conservation movement stepped up, including former Greens Senators Bob Brown and Christine Milne AO. And on the right, we have basically the flight crew with Bob Brown and Christine Milne. Bob's the tall one, Christine on the right. There's Dion, Charlotte, and actually we don't bother in there, but we do have Jason. Smiley Jason there. And just also to mention that the front seat was used as the, if you like, passenger or second pilot seat in this aircraft. Pilot flew from the rear cockpit. All agreed it was essential for an accompanying aircraft to maintain visual contact throughout, as this was to be a commemoration of the original flight and not a recreation. The sport aircraft would also serve as photo ship for air-to-air photography and filming, and proved ideal for this. Brenda's great-great-nephew, Oliver Ollie Ditcham, a commercial pilot originally from Hobart but now based in Brisbane, pleasingly also joined the project, sourcing a Cessna 180K VHIHG India Hotel Golf, constructor's number 180-53161, on loan from Stick and Rudder Aviation at Caboolture in Queensland, and flew it down to Cambridge Aerodrome, Victoria, with his fiancée Jennifer Jen Besgrove to begin the delivery journey to Hobart. And yeah, there you can see we're doing some me taking photos in the rear cockpit, and we were doing a lot of turning and trying to basically stay in contact with the Tiger Moth, which was a much slower flight, and so we had to keep up. Map of the flight path. Our planned track anti-clockwise from Cressy, which you can see towards the, I don't know if you can see the pointer. I'm just circling Cressy at the moment in the green dot. or the green circle there. And then we sort of struck out due south across the coast. And this is approximating on the east coast, the track that Brenda and Max would likely have followed. This is fairly close to what we did. I think we came down a little bit more directly down through central Tassie. There was a substantial crowd at Cressy, Victoria, to see Charlie X-Ray Victor, Millie, and India Hotel Golf get away on the positioning flights. The build-up to the event made this a special occasion with family, friends, and supporters of Cressy Aerodrome, Victoria. There were speeches and wishes of good luck. Sounds a lot like an original 1920s or 30s record attempt. No one doubted this will be a difficult thing to achieve. It must be noted that the Tiger Moth cruises around 70 to 75 knots or 130 to 140 kilometres per hour. But of course, the biplane was susceptible to the wind, and heavy headwinds did on occasion reduce our ground speed significantly. This also affected fuel burn and therefore range. We would be observing weather reports perhaps more thoroughly than most aviators that week. Also, we flew VFR, visual flight rules, meaning that to proceed, we basically required unobstructed by weather vision of the way ahead. Safety oars came first. And at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that is the departure from Cressy. This is the first flight crew down to position the aircraft to Hobart. There's the two aircraft at Cambridge Aerodrome. Here we have we'll talk some more about that in a moment. Getting away before lunch on Sunday, the 4th of September, the first positioning flight to Hobart was possibly one of the coldest and limited our height on the crossing. The higher we climbed, the colder it got, and it was very cold. Partly because Jason, the pilot, wore a heated flight jacket, which had connection issues and didn't fully work, whilst I resolved to purchase snow gloves and another jumper. 7 layers clearly wasn't enough. The partnership with Ollie worked well. India Hotel Golf had the legs and speed to get ahead of us and report back on the weather, allowing us to optimise our flight plan. On occasion, we were flying below Melbourne Centre radar coverage when our height was around 1,500 feet and often lower to fly under the weather. The radar relay provided by the Cessna was important, particularly if we went for a swim. We landed at Lurana, King Island Airport, thawed out in the terminal and continued on, crossing the Tasmanian coastline around 4 p.m. Wynyard was our overnight, courtesy of local generosity, supplying a grass tie-down, accommodation and even a car. The following day was more intense, very turbulent as we flew up between the ranges. Both crew of the D.H.82 were feeling queasy due to the length of the flight. It was a long flight and into headwinds and approaching weather-generated turb. We landed early at Tunbridge, the lovely glider strip where Jen joined the flight. Dick, the organiser, caught up in his Tesla. With fuel now an issue, he delivered us what we required and on we flew. Reaching Cambridge, located close to Hobart International, we parked up at the Aviation ramp, bemusing the trainee pilots in their Cessnas. Millie was kept in hangar for our short stay at Hobart, which was cut short due to approaching inclement weather. Really a poor outlook was approaching, after only one evening with our lovely hosts. Planned events, including offering joy flights in both aircraft to sponsors of the commemoration, reluctantly terminated, and despite plans to depart on the 50th anniversary date, which was Thursday, the 8th of September, we made for departure instead on Tuesday early afternoon, 2 days early. As mentioned, former Greens Senators Bob Brown and Christine Milne, AO, were in hot demand for comment. Approachable, both gave interviews, and your speaker discovered Senator Brown had only become involved in environmental matters shortly after the original Pedder flight. Impetus to fight the dams issue within a decade, perhaps. It does sound that it was a seminal moment for the Greens movement in Tasmania. Christine Milne handed pilot Jason a scroll to be delivered to Canberra. This was to be presented to the Prime Minister, a task unfortunately unable to be completed at the time due to unforeseen circumstances. The Hobart media, summoned by Dick, were enamoured with Charlotte and her story of connection with her great-great-aunt, and paparazzi were busy chasing her for comment, as she was to fly the next and most important leg, tracing the original flight made by her great-great-aunt and carrying some personal belongings, including a scarf once belonging to Brenda and a Pedder coin. Journalists from ABC Hobart 7:30 Report and Australian Geographic were among the media represented. Dick and I had the throng organised and allowed Jason to conclude preparations, including refuelling. A superb photo op came when Charlotte assisted Jason to push out the Tiger into the sun, which we can see in the top right. And on the bottom right, we can see the refueling operation surrounded by cameras, which was part of the the feeling of the day. It was just very, very busy. Couple of matching photos. Following a much filmed takeoff, Jason brought the Tiger Moth for an overflight at the request of the airfield owner, the son of the original owner, who knew Max Price back in the day and whom I interviewed on the subject. This signalled the start of the commemoration. India Hotel Golf, with Dion and Mike working their cameras, followed after a short and frustrating wait, as Cambridge air traffic was clearly considered intense by someone at ATC at this time of day. There was a Cessna 402, I think, which started up and then warmed up and then taxied out and in due course took off. And this was all allowed to happen while we were sitting there at the end of the runway. So I'm not sure someone was making a point. East coast of Tassie. In many ways, the best part of the flight. We had beautiful sunny weather up the coast. Glad we had departed ahead of the inclement weather. You could feel the impudence of the tiny Tiger Moth against the immensity of the overwater legs. Before leaving St Helens, we were uncertain about accommodation on Flinders Island, and transportation was also hit and miss. Therefore, it was decided Bridport was to be our next overnight, the pilots deciding to cross to Flinders Island the following morning, Wednesday the 7th. Here we're heading towards the Fleurieu Peninsula. And it's just a lovely photo, just shows the aircraft in its habitat there, I guess. Northeast Tassie. In planning the flight, our Tasmanian East Coast track marked perhaps, as said earlier, the most important part of the flight, in that we were exactly retracing the initial routes taken in 1972, as we passed places of significance in the story of Brenda and Max, including the location where they were last sighted, the lighthouse at Eddystone Point. Here we have a photo of Millie passing the lighthouse in the distance. Jason's favourite route option was the coastal route Max Price was believed to have planned to take, Wilson's Prom via Flinders Island. We had correctly flown the early part of the original Tasmania East Coast route from Cambridge to St Helens, only heading cross-country to Bridport and missing perhaps 20 miles of the original route, which was subsequently resumed for the crossing to Flinders Island. Peter, our host at Bridport, through his company Flinders Island Aviation, also operates Lady Baron Grass, Flinders Island Airport, which became our next destination on this hop. Jason, for the first and only time, had to contend with a finicky Millie, but got her started in the end. She was in a hangar too, so I'm not sure what was going on there. She was there for the night. Somewhere on our current leg, Max and Brenda had disappeared. As the co-pilot on this leg, I felt it was particularly important to quietly honour her bravery, grit and determination to change her world for the better. I pondered likely places the aircraft may have ended up, maybe the clear but deep waters around Flinders Island, or the brooding peaks of the island, perhaps a rocky cove. Imagery taken during this phase is shown here on the right and the lower photo as well. For the final overwater leg, we had cinematographer Mike Gissing in the Moth's front cockpit to add overwater footage for his documentary in support of the Pedder cause. During this leg, over at choppy Bass Strait, the Cessna had several chances for overflights and photographic passes for Dion over Millie. A nice touch somewhere mid-crossing came when air traffic controller and AHSA member Phil Varbre inquired as to whether Dion was in the Moth. A brief exchange followed, but it all made us feel a little more connected in such a vulnerable position in which we doubtless were. Best not to think too much about the downside, but plan for everything. So landfall and Wilson's Prom. So we have on the left a photo of the aircraft still passing down the coast, but we thought we'd put it in there. It's a lovely shot, and that's with Charlotte in the front cockpit. But we took a close look at Deal Island, and then ducking between the weather, we eventually and loiteringly reached Wilson's Promontory with much relief, seen on the right there as Millie approaches the prom. We enjoyed following the coastline in clear sunny conditions at appropriate height above the beach until arriving at Yarram by midday. Again, due to weather, we decided to call it off for the night. It was worth celebrating at a counter meal, but we still had business to attend to the next day. Liz Eden joined us at Yarram for her leg to Malakuta. We hoped we had beaten the worst of the weather to follow and at least had options again. Thursday, the 8th of September, was the 50th anniversary of the fatal flight. We left Yarram, stopping briefly at Orbost, as we were using more fuel this day due to the strongest headwinds encountered. Two large high-pressure systems were going to give us a hard time the next days. Turbulence had also increased markedly. Malakuta had winds in excess of 25 to 30 knots and a grippy new tarmac runway. Let's say this, our landings were interesting. I have nothing but the utmost respect for the pilot cell's expertise at this time. Things could have so easily gone pear-shaped. Mike had brought Liz's car up from Yarram, so we were a team again. Given the conditions on this anniversary date, we had to wonder if the task was meant to be completed at all. The issue now was to choose a weather window to safely proceed into Canberra. The outlook had deteriorated somewhat with substantial rain, and we knew we had to stay put, which meant in practical terms, we weren't leaving Malakuta until Saturday. The crew had an early dinner, so we were able to watch the ABC 7:30 report of the commemoration and all agreed they'd done an excellent job with much rare footage and interviews. Friday was spent in the rain, exploring the Malakuta estuary and intertidal zone on foot and dodging errant kangaroos. And we have some photos there. Actually, I'll just point out that was probably as much rain as we actually had on the windscreen on the top right. Rain never penetrated the cockpit. I guess the top wing kept it off me. Didn't seem to come in. We've got some lovely photography of the or a nice image of the Canberra, the hills around Canberra. And the bottom right is actually a photo of the weather we had to fly through. We put it into this slide sequence, but it's actually crossing Bass Strait. So we're after we left Flinders Island, we had to eventually we reached this weather past Deal Island, and we had to pass that, find a way through to get to Wilson's Prom. So there was a bit of heart-stopping moments there, I think. On Saturday morning, having heard the sad news of the passing of HRH Queen Elizabeth II overnight, and with further consideration for the inclement weather, we decided to play safe and assume we might not make Canberra. So we redistributed Mike with the luggage to remain to be collected by Dick in the car. So he stayed in Malakuta. With Ollie in India Hotel Golf giving us a good head start, the two aircraft headed inland this time towards the ACT. We proceeded just well towards the gap in the ranges between the Brindabellas, topping out spectacularly at just under 2,000 metres or 6,000 feet, with snow capping and a large cloud bank to our starboard. So we were kind of getting a bit hemmed in. Soon I was feeling my blood pressure rise as we commenced circling in the valley with thick cloud and reduced visibility ahead. I thought surely we couldn't be heading back to Malakuta or Yarram. This would mean termination of the flight just short of the goal, and nobody wanted that. A precautionary landing was deemed advisable, and we took a look at Bunyan, yet another scenic glider airfield with 3 radiating grass runways on a hill. It was a classy landing to duck under the clouds and squirrel into this attractive location, and I wondered what the traffic on the adjacent freeway thought of the mirage of this ancient biplane apparently landing in a random paddock. With an eye to the goal, we decided to make for Canberra, circling a few times until a safe break in the clouds appeared. Ollie reporting back when a window appeared and it was deemed safe to proceed. As expected, it was highly chilled air at this point, varying upwards from 3,000 feet where we were. And again, we circled, this time until ATC cleared us into Fairburn, which is the airport at Canberra. And that was air traffic control clearing us there. I'd like to believe I saw the landing through the prism of Brenda's point of view, filming footage of Canberra during finals as she might have hoped to see it, admittedly from the front cockpit, not the rear, and the landing at Fairburn itself for posterity and for the documentary. At left, we see the welcoming party made up of organisers, Save Pedder sympathisers, family of the crew, and the crew of India Hotel Golf. The right-hand image shows the flight team of the 2 aircraft, Ollie holding the special scroll, which was unable to be delivered on the day. That was promised to be handed over to the Environment Minister in due course. I believe it was Environment Minister. Unfortunately, the passing of Queen Elizabeth caused an unforeseen shutdown of Parliament for an appropriate period of mourning, so that the planned skywriting, meetings with parliamentarians and media commitments were no longer possible and were cancelled. The organisers have plans in place to conduct the skywriting and lobbying activities in early March 2023. Ollie and the Cessna disappeared, not in a bad way, but flew off north for home as soon as we concluded the Fairburn arrival. Most of us were able to celebrate our success at a rather dignified lunch at the Hyatt Hotel. Putting away Millie in the hangar at Fairburn before we went for tea reminded me of how other flights might have ended. I didn't include it, but there was an opportunity to take a photo showing this biplane backlit with the hangar doors, and it reminded me perhaps of the end of the the Great Race of 1934 when they were putting the aircraft away at Laverton Air Force Base. That's the kind of image I had in my head. The flight had, of course, achieved its purpose of raising awareness of the issue and to celebrate the memory of those who perished half a century ago. As observed, the ABC 730 program ran a good piece with lots of rare and unseen contemporary footage. Millie, for her part, ran well virtually throughout the whole show and demonstrated how well-maintained and flown single-engine vintage aircraft can be as safe as any modern type. If only the mainstream media focused more on the lessons learned in this for the reporting of airshow tragedies. Pilot Jason concluded, after 8 days covering 2,800 kilometres, about 960 litres of avgas and 15 litres of oil, Millie the Tiger Moth never missed a beat. It was good to complete the flight that started 50 years ago and its challenges, not only for Brenda and Max, but also for the family. So what we have here is the search area. So this is supplied by the Civil Aviation Historical Society at Essendon Airport. They have the original search file, and it's a very interesting document. Doesn't tell us where the aircraft is or the people, but it tells us the following. The search area was well covered by many search aircraft and a government vessel over 21 days. And I believe, personally, a bit longer after that, there were people who kept, I'm sure, searching unofficially. Despite 50 years of speculation, people clearly cared. I'm currently unable to confirm if RAF aircraft P3 Orion were involved through 11 Squadron, who were located at RAF Base Edinburgh in South Australia and were often called out to search and rescue taskings in that era. That's something we're still looking into. Witness sightings and floating debris in the area were noted in the report and acted upon. Every single one of them appears to have been acted upon if they were thought to be genuine. Unfortunately, the weather deteriorated over the days of the search and opportunities to recover any potential wreckage were lost or any particular evidence. The fickle weather in September challenged us as well as the searchers. It was a very difficult time to be flying. They chose to fly in September because the imminent flooding of the lake was to occur and they felt they needed to go there and then. So, of course, we had to follow suit. So the total area covered shows areas that were covered not just on one day, but sometimes numerous times, and extends up into the Banks Strait and up towards the Furneaux Group and Flinders Island, which is up here. There were numerous reports of wreckage, and 2 or 3 were searched for by the government vessel. I believe it was a survey vessel. It might have been a fishery survey vessel. That was co-opted for the search and steamed around the area here where the wreckage seen in the water was spotted. Wreckage was likely to have been, but not confirmed to be, pieces of plywood and other timber potentially floating, and perhaps even a possibility of an orange or red scarf was seen, or what was identified as a scarf, such as Brenda Hean may have been wearing or was wearing. So that could not be confirmed because nothing was able to be retrieved out of the water. As a result, we have no hard evidence to this day exactly. We have no known hard evidence where the aircraft ended up. So that's a summary of the search. The full report is in the Civil Aviation Historical Society archive, and it's very good. It's a day-by-day, blow-by-blow account. Tells you which aircraft were flying, what areas, what sectors they were allocated, how much they flew, how many hours that day, each day. And there were reports coming in from all the way up the coast from civilians, from rangers, from a different quantity or a vast quantity of people who just wanted to help. Much like the searches of the past, the Southern Cloud in the 30s, for instance, that the searchers had to decide what to discount and what to follow up. And of course, they stuck to this fairly well, this sort of area. That's not to say that, the aircraft didn't, divert off route and possibly disappear in the mountains somewhere, but it's considered highly unlikely given that it made it to Eddystone Point. So acknowledgements, as you can see up there, I'm not going to read through all of them. They are available in the article on Aviation Report Down Under, but I've taken from that to write this. The photographs are a new edition, as is the report and the summary of the report. That's something that we didn't have when we were flying down there, and we only had some really bad copies taken of some very poor quality originals of the flight plan. I'm not sure even where they came from and who had them. Haven't been able to get a good copy of those. We had some really good assistance from people who had, shall we say, skin in the game. People such as Brenda Hean's niece, Celia Watchorn, Mr. Charles Donnelly, supplied some of this information, and that was his father who had actually taken some of the photos and the footage on the day of departure. Without him, we possibly would have had very little or no photographic coverage of the day. It's interesting that, you know, people have said, yes, there was no real interest from the press at the time. I'm not sure whether that's true or not, whether people were warned away, the press were told not to go there. There's that kind of speculation as well. We can only say this is what we know. Further acknowledgements. I'd like to acknowledge Paul and Siobhan for inviting me to fly in Millie and record this historic event, a rare opportunity I shall always treasure. I personally, to give an indication, flew 13.2 hours in CXV in Millie and another 9.4 in India Hotel Golf, including the longest leg, which was 2.4 hours crossing Bass Strait from Cressy to King Island. That was in Millie. This remains one of life's more challenging events, and I'm glad I went along for history's sake. Special mention must be made of Dick Friend, who I believe put heart and soul and quite a lot of resourcing into this project. Otherwise, it would not have occurred. And he's a very important person to this story. Charles Donnelly, as I mentioned, supplied unpublished observations and imagery, including from unique colour footage taken by his late father, Peter C. Donnelly, ACS. A very well-known or a famous cameraman in his own right, intending to add his father's voice to the record of the original flight, and we're glad he did. And he hasn't done this very often, so we had some people going to bat for us so we could obtain this information. And there are the references: the original Aviation Report article, the Brenda Hean tribute flight, which is Mike Gissing's cinematography for the Lake Pedder project, I guess, and then also 7:30 report. These are available, and I might mention Peter will be he's recording this. He'll be saving it and putting it up for members to view later on, and I'm sure we could share it. I don't think he'd have a problem. I will ask him if we can share it with those who are really interested and want to follow up on this. The final reference there is SAR action by Launceston RCC, DHAQL, which is the report held by the Civil Aviation Historical Society. That concludes the talk, and I guess we will have questions next.
So we'll take some questions from in the room first, if there are any.
Yeah, thanks, Dion. A really interesting talk. I'm just interested in what the current status of with restoring Lake Pedder, because I know that there was some suggestion that it might be drained and restored, and that was the reason that the divers went down a couple of years ago and discovered that the beach was essentially still intact. So where's that up to?
That's a good question. We cover a few different areas here: the history, the flying side, and the conservation side. What I understand is that the idea to drain Lake Pedder has come from the conservationists and was partly driven, as I understand it, by the investigation into the maintenance and the viability of restoring the dam, because the dam is actually in need of repair and maintenance. And I believe there's something like it could be $160 million would be having to be spent on that. So I think that the Restore Pedder people, or the conservation movement, has rallied around this and decided perhaps it's time to drain the lake and return the original environment up there. It is a very rare example of an alpine lake with a beach, and probably unique. I think it's unique in Tasmania, certainly. And so they're very keen to do that and make the point. So it was an opportunity that was seen to be made and to be taken. And of course, the 50th anniversary also came around. So it was prescient that it would happen. That's, as I understand, where it stands. I don't think that there's any potential will, I think, with the politicians to actually drain the lake. I could be wrong, but maybe it's early days yet. They might still have some way to go. Yeah, so that's as much as I know at this stage.
Okay, thanks for that, Dion. Any other questions in the room? Nope. Okay, what about online?
Yes, Warwick speaking. You were very good with your presentation and good detail there. So weren't many gaps needing to be filled, I suppose.
Yes. There's probably not a lot that can be said beyond it in a way, because what we know is what we know, and what we don't know, we don't know. So it may take some time for any new information to come out. There certainly will be information in the historical files, further information to be discovered, but whether it leads to any finds, I'm at this stage doubtful. I've got an open mind. I guess I should say, you know, probably a good question that might be asked is, what do you think happened to the aircraft? There were definitely, if you did see the early photo, which I thought was magnificent, of the Moth at Cambridge Aerodrome, that was actually used on the cover of the newspapers after the aircraft went missing. And it was a very poor reproduction in those days. And it actually, when we reproduced it from an original, original negative was scanned and then the original sent to me, I did a little bit of fiddling around with it in Lightroom and discovered that there was a very clear smoke coming out underneath. And what I deduced from that is that Max was actually showing off a bit, in effect doing burnouts. He put on his smoke machine, his smoke distribution system, and he was sitting there with smoke coming out while they were waving. So he was doing everything for the camera. I think it was actually a really cool piece of photography and a great thing to see. We can speculate. I spoke to the original airfield owner, as I said earlier, and his son now runs Cambridge Aerodrome. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the names. I have them written down somewhere. I should have provided that, but I can certainly find that information if anyone's interested. The original owner did tell me that he knew Max Price well. He told me that he had, in fact, crashed about 9 aircraft in his time flying around Australia and Tasmania, probably mostly in Tasmania. Accidents, weather, all sorts of unrelated incidents, and that he was known to be fiddling around with his aircraft a lot, including with the fuel system. Now, we know he rebuilt the aircraft entirely, so he probably was invested in the fuel system and everything else. So he probably did want to tune it and make sure it was working. So we can only wonder whether there was a fuel issue. I'd like to think possibly maybe the kindest thought is that it was a carbon monoxide issue and they both sort of fell asleep and the aircraft then crashed into the sea and they never knew anything about it. That's one way of looking at it, I guess. There's the whole, you know, did someone put sugar in the fuel tank or do something else to affect the aircraft? We can't really speculate on that because, again, we don't have enough information. Brenda did go to a senior person in the conservation movement back in the day, and she actually said that she had received a phone call and it was a threatening phone call, and she didn't know who had been talking on the other end. The male voice just said, "Would you like to go for a swim?" So out of all this and the break into the hangar, which did occur, results in a bit of a conspiracy theory. You know, it was a conservation movement maybe versus the government, who knows. That's been touted as a potential reasoning as well. But we do know that there was a break-in. Charles and I think one of the conservation people went down there and actually walked through the hangar. And they had to look at the break-in damage and to the lock, to the door, etc., and noted that yes, it seemed to have actually happened. What I put to people is that if you're the pilot, and I learnt this out of the flight, I guess, if you're the pilot, you wouldn't take off unless you dotted your I's and crossed your T's. Now, maybe Max had perhaps become used to flying in Tasmania and was very you know, aware of his surroundings and knew the weather was going to be fine for the day and was quite relaxed about it, and he just took off and flew, and then something happened, or perhaps, you know, the weather did change slightly, but we don't believe it did affect the flight. One thing that you do have to consider is if his beacon was left behind, was that because it was broken or non-functional, whether it was ever tested? Was another beacon taken along anyway? He might borrow one from someone else, but we never found out to that end. But what we do know is that if he took off without it, then that might have been a mistake, or, you know, that might have been an airmanship issue. But that's, again, pure speculation. You would think that he would have said, no, I'm not taking off till I've got my beacon. Or it seems that in 1972, there was enough organisation and regulation around this that he would have had to commit to the kind of eventualities that he might foresee or might not foresee. So yeah, that's my sort of speculation on it. Yeah.
Dion,
Warwick speaking out, just going to mention, you mentioned perhaps the possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning. It is interesting, of course, that it had a cabin, a cockpit over tiger moth, which is very rare indeed for tiger moths, but there are some. And that is something which would answer the questions of why they just disappeared, apart from the fact it's unlikely if the aircraft crashed to be. It's surprising there are no flotsam or jetsam of any sort found, but if it hit and went down fairly intact and pulled itself all together down to sink, and it may be that they had carbon monoxide poisoning. We'll never know, of course, but it's that one proposal which would perhaps fit the bill anyway, fit the story.
Yeah, that was a thought I had. There's nothing was ever suggested that might have been the case, but you cannot rule it out either. Of course, if they find the aircraft, say in the water or even up in the hill somewhere, there's not likely to be too much of it left by now. Possibly only the engine block, particularly if it's in the sea. So it'd be a needle in the haystack proposition.
Yeah. If they did find it, the fuselage of a tiger moth is metal. So that's
correct. Yes.
Too.
Yep. Yes.
Dion, Peter here.
Yes.
Here's an easy question here that David Knight has asked. How many aircraft have disappeared over Bass Strait?
Oh, that's one I'm not sure about, to be honest. There have been a number over the years, and starting back in the 30s, yes, and D.H.86 Express, I believe, airliners, Australian National Airlines, through to Bristol Freighters. Oh, the Bristol Freighter was lost, I think, in the 60s or 70s. Daryl's nodding.
Some during the war as well.
Yeah, during the war. Yep, there were. There was a I don't think I mentioned it here, but when we flew over Deal Island, there was apparently an Oxford which had crashed there, and the remains there, at least the remains of the engines are part of the fuselage still. So there were aircraft that went missing, and there was a case. I was actually reading this in the RAF's more recent publication on the Cold War warriors regarding the P3 operations, the Orion operations in the 70s, 60s, etc. And there was a search and rescue for a, I think, I forget the type of aircraft, a light aircraft. And there was just basically stuff up after stuff up. And, they weren't really set up to search and rescue so well back then. Opportunities were lost. And an aircraft did go down and was, completely disappeared, including a survivor who was seen in the water. Who was unfortunately not able to be rescued before nightfall and disappeared. So, yeah, right up to fairly recent times, there have been missing flights. So it's not unknown, even in modern times.
Peter, it's Ross Darrigan here in Melbourne. I've got a question for Dion. Dion, when they were last seen passing the lighthouse, and that was the last time people had seen them, that part of the coastline, is that a part of the coastline where there's not a lot of fishing boats or sort of like a large fishing fleet or any sort of cargo ships? Because a biplane flying over water would have attracted a lot of attention. So I'm surprised maybe a fishing boat didn't see them, or
I don't think
the lighthouse.
Yeah, hi there, Ross. Yeah, nice of you to join us, and thanks for the question. There does appear in the sighting reports to have been reports from fishing boats, from fishing vessels. There were sighting reports on land. As I said, there was at least one from field officers or rangers out along the coast there, and people on properties, just people around the place that witnessed. And there were plenty of reports, including they were plotted on a map in this report, and there's conglomerations of reports on their flight path up to and just past the northeast coast. So they were pretty much, I think, spotted all the way up the coast, and so it appears that they did go missing beyond there on the flight, possibly out to Flinders Island. Whether they then changed direction, who knows? We don't have that information, and we haven't got any definite spottings on that. But it is interesting that those areas that you mentioned, that northeast area and the Strait area, that was well searched. There was wreckage spotted from the air numerous times, maybe 3 or 4 times at least, significant wreckage that they thought could be associated, including, there was a scarf floating, what they think was a scarf floating in the water. But none of these were able to be retrieved because by the time the vessel got there, it was too late. The wind had blown it away, or the water had washed it away, and they just weren't able to rediscover that wreckage. So
Yeah,
it's very hard to say.
Just getting back to the spotting. I mean, a tiger moth or a biplane would be easy to spot for just any layperson, really. More so than say a general GA plane with like a single wing. So at least, because and the engine noise would have stood out as being unusual.
Yes.
And both wings.
Yes.
So yes. So I assume those reports are fairly accurate then if they spotted a biplane.
They were taken very seriously. They were, and there were different spottings where someone said it was a silver aircraft, someone said it was blue. There's elements of blue in the scheme there that we saw in that colour photo. But people did describe it differently, and in some cases there were actual noted discrepancies that were accounted for. They said, it was definitely a different aircraft, or it turned out it was. And we found this ourselves when someone said that they had spoken to someone and, would you like to speak to this gentleman? He has information. He saw the aircraft the day it disappeared, and he was right up there. It turned out he rang back and he said, I'm terribly sorry, I got my days mixed up. It was a different day. It was a different aircraft. So at least he came forward and said that, but people do say this from time to time. People did note it was a tiger moth when they saw it, or a number of people did note that. So that was quite good evidence.
Okay, thank you.
That's all right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Dion. Great talk. It's created a lot of interest. And as Dion said, I'll be editing the recording. And what I'll do is add on the end some of the official video photography, video stuff that was taken during the flights. So I'll add that at the end of the video. We've got permission to do that. So, okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
On the 6th of September 2022, a Tiger Moth and a Cessna prepared to depart Cambridge Airport, Hobart. The flight was to commemorate environmental activist Brenda Hean and pilot Max Price, who had attempted to fly from Hobart to Canberra 50 years earlier. As a last-ditch effort to stop the flooding of Lake Pedder, Brenda and Max planned to fly Max's Tiger Moth over Parliament House and sign write, "Save Lake Pedder." Their plane vanished without a trace as it headed to Flinders Island. Foul play was suspected, as the hangar had been broken into the night before the flight. Brenda had also been receiving threatening phone calls in the lead up to their departure, including the threat, "How would you like to go for a swim?" Members of the Restore Lake Pedder group scrambled to get to Cambridge Airport as the decision was made to depart 2 days earlier than planned. Predicted bad weather threatened the whole venture. The Tiger Moth, Millie, had been flown down from Cressy, Victoria, just days before. With a quick turnaround, pilot Jason Cheney with Cessna pilot Oliver Ditcham prepped for departure. Organiser, Dick Friend, watched nervously. Charlotte Ditcham, great-great-niece of Brenda Hean, was flying the first leg to honour Brenda's bravery and commitment 50 years earlier.
So not long now before I jump into the front seat of Millie, the Tiger Moth, and I'm wearing a scarf of Brenda's, and in my pockets I'll have some Pedder sand and a Pedder penny and a photo of Brenda on Lake Pedder.
Starting an old biplane is rudimentary and requires someone to stand at the tail to stop it running away. Taxiing past the yellow Cessna support plane and the enthusiastic group of well-wishers, the adventure began.
was just so excited when we took off, and the views were spectacular. Got cold very quickly. When I looked out, tried not to stick my head out too much because it was really windy and really cold. Put my head down a lot just to try and keep warm and get out of the breeze a bit. I was mostly worried just that I'd get sick, but I didn't, so that's good. Held onto that sick bag very tightly. But no, I had no time to be nervous, so we just did it. It was kind of nice, and not that it was quiet, but at the same time it was peaceful. Just to be up there looking out, it was really peaceful and calming. I guess I thought that I was doing something pretty unique. No one else is really going to be doing this flight, and especially in a Tiger Moth. And yeah, it felt pretty special to be doing this and honouring Brenda.
St Helens was a quick refuelling stop, and Millie was soon underway with Charlotte again in the front seat. Bridport on the northeast coast of Tasmania was the next stop before crossing Bass Strait. The route to Canberra was to closely follow the original plan proposed by Max Price, up the east coast and refuel at Flinders Island, then along the Victorian coast into New South Wales and across the Great Dividing Range into Canberra. Arriving in Bridport safely after outrunning the bad weather that had closed in on Hobart was a great feeling. But the dangerous Bass Strait crossing lay ahead the next day. Millie's pilot Jason goes through his usual pre-flight preparation. Checking the fuel is vital for the crossing of Bass Strait. One theory about the disappearance of Brenda and Max was their reserve tank might have been intentionally contaminated. Oliver Ditcham is Brenda Hean's great-great-nephew and the support pilot of the Cessna that has been flying with Millie. His role is to support Jason by flying ahead, checking weather and relaying radio communications. For the first leg to Flinders Island, aviation journalist Dion Makowski is in the front seat. Millie is set up to be flown from the rear seat, and having someone in the front seat is important to keep the plane balanced. With cloud cover building, the team were keen to head north. Like any 80-year-old, Millie had a hard time getting started on this crisp Tassie morning. But eventually she fired up and the team were underway.
For me, I grew up knowing a little bit about Brenda and what she stood for. I spent a lot of time actually out at Lake Pedder, so for me it was more a case of living up to her legacy and doing right by her name.
As a young activist, I met Brenda Hean, who was quite different from most of the other campaigners. She was a polite society lady, so she was such an inspiration because he was someone so committed who actually then, along with Max Price, gave her life to this cause of saving Lake Pedder. And so, you know, the least I can do is spend a few months celebrating her commitment and doing this flight as a tribute to her effort to save what was the jewel of southwest Tasmania.
As the flight approaches Flinders Island, the first leg over Bass Strait has been smooth and without incident. And with a textbook touchdown on the grass strip at Lady Barron, the long leg to Yarram in Victoria awaits. Topping up with fuel for the long leg over water is a rudimentary affair. And with cinematographer Mike Gissing in Millie's front seat, we share in the thrill of flying a Tiger Moth over Flinders Island and Bass Strait. Instrumentation is minimal. Controls are basic. Without instrumentation to fly in clouds, the tactic is to go around or under potential problem clouds. Approaching Deal Island, the team are reminded of the 1943 plane crash that killed 4 RAAF airmen. Deal Island has a grass airstrip which was said to be in poor condition. The team was thankful the flight was going smoothly and this emergency option was not needed. Lower clouds were moving in from the west, and at times Millie was flying at 1,500 feet to get under them. The smell of salty air in our nostrils. After an hour of water crossing, it was a relief to be over land at Wilson's Promontory. At least an emergency landing on a beach was now possible. Arriving at Yarram, we had achieved our first major step, which was to commemorate Brenda and Max's journey and not reenact their tragedy. For the leg from Yarram to Malakuta, Jason was joined by Liz Eden. Due to the decision to fly 2 days earlier, the original plan of having various legs of the journey in Millie offered to restore Pedder enthusiasts was changed. Liz was the only extra person to join the adventure. The changes to plans also meant we had no ground support, so Mike had to drive Liz's car to Malakuta. But it gave him the rare opportunity to film both planes taking off. With weather closing in and headwinds building, the Tiger Moth struggled to maintain a decent speed. Made of a timber frame with stretched, painted fabric wings, Millie is light and easily buffeted as the winds picked up.
Yesterday was a very windy day. We had very, very slow ground speeds. Yeah, I think we were battling about a 30-knot headwind, and his cruise speed is about 75 knots, so it's a very, very slow ground speed for him. In fact, the cars on the highway were going faster than he was. Then we got into Malakuta and woke up today and decided that we weren't going anywhere because all the rain and clouds were moving south down towards us, so we weren't going to actually make it through.
As the plane sat grounded at Malakuta, events on the other side of the planet were about to change everything. The planned triumphal arrival in Canberra to complete Brenda and Max's original journey was about to unravel. The death of Queen Elizabeth, the day before the final leg to Canberra, meant Parliament was suspended, and out of respect, all the planned activities for Millie's arrival were cancelled. With doubts about getting across the Great Dividing Range, the pilots decided to make an early dash up the New South Wales coast next morning to attempt to get through the mountains. If it was too dangerous, the flight would be abandoned and the Tiger Moth would turn back. Against the odds, Millie and the Cessna made it through to Canberra to a small but enthusiastic group of well-wishers, including Celia Watchorn, Brenda Hean's niece, who had watched Brenda depart 50 years earlier. Although all other media and events were cancelled, the champagne was popped and the crew posed for photos to commemorate their epic achievement.